To say that Wyatt was nervous would be an understatement. After his talk with Princess Clara, he enjoyed a few hours of mostly restful respite while enjoying delicious sweets and snacks that filled his heart with delight. Slowly but surely, the pain started to diminish, and his senses returned to normal scant hours after the resupply was completed, just in time for him to enjoy a restful sleep. Right after coming out of the shower, a voice coming from nowhere startled him. It was Commander Redford speaking directly to him through the Ontoro implant, as the princess called the second implant he received, now fully integrated into his cranium and ears. "Lieutenant Wyatt, it seems the procedure was a success according to my readings. We shall perform a short test. Indicate to the ship's AI that you copied my message." Wyatt did so, and a few seconds later he heard Redford reply, "Splendid. Report within an hour to the training area." That was all Redford said to him, a direct order with no room for debate or misinterpretation. What he didn't understand was why his commander would want to visit the chambers so early. He usually tends to his duties, sensor sweeps, and files some reports, and then exercises. I thought for sure Commander Redford was a man who stuck to a given schedule. "Guess I was wrong," he muttered, while making his way to the large room dedicated to simulated training. When he arrived, he saw that all the chambers were empty but ready to be used. Also, 20 large monitors were now hanging from the ceiling. The monitors themselves displayed 20 spots that listed 20 names, his being among them. He turned to his commanding officer with a look of utter bemusement, even as nervousness ate away at his senses. "Commander Redford, why am I listed up there?" he asked dumbly. Redford turned his head Wyatt's way before answering. "Are you not familiar with the training scores?" Wyatt nodded. "I am, Commander. It's just that back at the Academy, that competition was reserved for prominent nobles depending on their paths and specializations." "Right. I forgot how the Academy tends to operate. Most fleets and Royal Command like to be more pragmatic in that approach. As commander of the fighter division, it is my duty and responsibility to oversee the capabilities of those I judge to be my best pilots and pit them against each other in a friendly competition. Ideally, 15 nobles and 5 commoners fill the 20 available spots. This time, though, only 3 commoners with sufficient promise are available to me. You are one of them, Mr. Staples," he finished with a barely perceptible grin. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Couldn't you have asked me first or something?" Wyatt shouted in his mind, nervousness making his innards shift with discomfort. The Academy was one thing, but he was likely going to face experienced fighter pilots, most of them damnable blue bloods, and get thoroughly humiliated in turn. "I wish I was still hauling compost right about now," he thought dejectedly. "You do not seem eager to partake in this competition, Wyatt," Redford said after Wyatt failed to say anything for several seconds. "Shit," he thought in a panic before clearing his throat. "I am merely surprised by the honor of letting me compete, Commander. My skills shall be lackluster in comparison, but I hope they will be enough to please you." "As long as you perform exemplary, I shall not find you wanting, Wyatt," Redford replied. His eyes flickered for a moment, and then the AI's voice filled the room. "Pilots, the competition shall begin in a minute. Form up and enter your designated training chamber. You shall be instructed what to do inside it. All of you shall face the same 6 trials. Your results, scores, and video performance shall be streamed live to one of the monitors above you. May the best pilot win." Immediately after, people began to move around, clearing the area and taking up seats on the steps that emerged from the walls and the ground at various points in the room. "Go now, Wyatt. Show me your skills. Don't hold back anything," Redford said, patted his shoulder, and then left. Wyatt followed the older man with his gaze until he was several meters away. Sighing, he straightened up and walked up to his training chamber. Lined up next to him were the other participants, most of them showing nothing but seriousness and conviction. A few were visibly as nervous as he was feeling. He waited for what felt like ages, each second stretching time much like the event horizon of a black hole would do. Then he stiffened even more when he saw 3 familiar figures enter the room. The first was Cynthia Winfield, who then stepped aside to give entry to Princess Clara and her brother, the prince. Instantly, everyone stood up and saluted in reverence to the 2 royals. The prince made a gesture, and everyone sat down as silence filled the room. He watched as the trio made their way to where Redford was sitting and then sat next to him in what was a private booth. Perfect. Just what I needed. Now I'm not only going to embarrass Commander Redford, but the Prince, too. I'll be lucky if he only takes away my rank and sends me to the brig, Wyatt thought, wincing internally. Pilots, the AI said, startling him. Your chambers shall open in 3, 2, 1. Please enter, the AI ordered, and left without any other choice, Wyatt entered. As the chamber closed behind him, his eyes widened in surprise, and he was unable to keep his mouth shut at what he saw. The training chambers at the Academy were little more than a VR unit, but what he was looking at was a full neural dive module. It had a pristine, white, and comfortable-looking chair, a set of wires at the top, and the usual console and equipment that a line fighter possessed. He sat on the chair and sank into it with gusto. The wires came to life and quickly latched to his head, wriggling and moving as they created a direct neural interface with his brain. He grasped the handles at the end of his armrests and fiddled with the various buttons on it, admiring the graph displays and keyboards in front of him. He grinned widely, his nervousness vanishing. This ain't the real thing, but it sure feels like it. Damn, I've missed this feeling, he muttered to himself before chuckling. So what if I'm going against experienced pilots? I'll just do my best and be done with it. Whatever happens next happens, he said, and then waited for the system to start. He didn't have to wait long, as 10 seconds later he felt his brain throb for a split second, then everything around him went black for a moment, only to be replaced by a surprisingly realistic depiction of being in space, a debris field of sorts. The voice of an AI spoke to him as if he was in a cockpit. The first trial shall be the trial of survival. There are 3 Drazan fighters in the area hunting for survivors. Avoid them until the timer runs out. Then, in front of his display monitor, he saw a 3-minute timer appear. A second later, it began to run. Without wasting a moment to be confused or surprised by the sudden start of the ordeal, Wyatt brought his engines to full max and began to dance and wedge around the debris of gutted ships. He wasn't hugely into history, but he learned his lessons well. He knew where he was. The result of an infamous battle over 1,000 years ago called the Holthan Massacre. The Drazan Collective, a warlike species of plant-based organisms that were mostly carnivorous, attacked the Principality alongside the Arabian Commonwealth, an independent human nation not part of the Pax Humanitas. The two allies only avoided an outright invasion to prevent other, stronger human nations, such as the Imperium and the Albion Federation, from assisting the Principality. Their raids were anything but, though their refusal to enter a full-scale war was the sole reason the Principality eventually managed to force a truce with them after this particular battle. While the Principality won a Pyrrhic victory, the Drazan, ever hateful of other species and desiring to take trophies and feed for themselves, hunted down every stranded fighter, shuttle, and life pod in the system after the battle was over. And now he was tasked with surviving that outcome. Far too easy, Wyatt barked out a laugh when he saw the Drazan fighters appear at the edge of his radar and were slowly but surely closing in on him. Checking the graphs and panels quickly, he discovered that he had 2 Hawk missiles available. No flares, no mines, and his twin-linker coil guns were at 20% ammo capacity. He smirked. Alert! Alert! Enemy fighters are within firing range and are engaging. Shields at 98%, the AI warned. Excellent, Wyatt replied, and spared a moment to ponder about something. This chamber is amazing. It even simulates standard G-forces, but I'm hardly feeling anything. So that's what the Kinetor implant is for. I guess the pain was worth it in the end, he exclaims excitedly before yanking to the side as much as the ship could handle, triggering his reverse thrusters at the same time, and finally unleashing his 2 Hawk missiles at the leader of the 3 Drazan fighters. The fighters were also burning at max speed, but they were too close to Wyatt's ship to dodge the missiles in time. The 2 missiles impacted the lead fighter, triggering an explosion that destroyed it wholesale. Wyatt didn't celebrate his kill. Instead, he immediately fell upon the second fighter, showering it with a deadly barrage of focused fire. He saw the fighter's shield glow, then pop after 2 seconds of sustained fire, only to then watch how the cockpit was turned into scrap, sending the fighter veering off to the side, lost forever as another piece of debris. The third fighter reacted accordingly, turning to fire upon Wyatt. "Warning, shields at 45%, the AI warned. Wyatt ignored it and began to wedge in seemingly random directions as he dodged debris and ire from the third Drazen fighter. He didn't have the ammo left to take down the third fighter like he had done the second, but he had an even better idea. As he moved gracefully at impossible speeds, purposefully taking the most hazardous paths he could find, he noticed that the Drazen fighter, being bulkier and slightly faster than his own, wasn't able to dodge all the debris, and soon he saw its shield pop, and a wing of the fighter was nearly torn completely off in the process. That's when he turned, ignoring a collision that nearly zapped his remaining shields, and fired in an arc. Most of his shots missed, but a stream of them landed on target, crippling the ship. Then he saw with satisfaction how the ship tumbled, colliding with a large chunk of what had been a cruiser, and exploded. He looked at the remaining time and saw he still had 50 seconds to spare as the countdown had stopped. Everything around him went dark, and then the view was replaced by a new vision of space, this time around a marvelous battleship as he flew in formation with other fighters. Checking his monitors again, he saw that his weapons were fully loaded. "Prepare to engage! Prepare to engage! Delta Squadron, keep formation and follow my lead," an unknown but commanding voice ordered. Instantly, Wyatt obeyed and wondered what was going to happen next. Then he saw it. A group of frigates and freighters that could only belong to the Ikanti hierarchy came into view. Unlike the Drazen, the Ikanti were an avian alien species that had once been defeated by the Principality, and then, centuries later, the Principality was humiliated by them due to sheer incompetence on the Principality's side. But he didn't recognize what was going on. The situation he was in didn't seem familiar to any battle he was aware of. "So this is either a raid or a kill-and-destroy action," he muttered to himself, frowning. He didn't approve of such actions. That was one of the reasons he detested pirates. But raiding alien supplies or disrupting their trade lanes? Well, he also didn't like it unless they were the Drazen. He hated them with a passion and wouldn't spare a second thought if that was the case. But he knew a few Ikantis, and he liked the smaller, chirpy aliens. "But orders are orders in this case," he said, divorcing himself from his personal feelings as the AI chimed again. "This is the second trial, the trial of obedience. Do not deviate from the orders given and fulfill them with optimal capacity." And thus, Wyatt went through the motions, no matter how much he disliked it. "He fought off the Drazen fighters," said Cynthia Winfield with apparent surprise. "It was most commendable," Clara added, her eyes glued to the screens as she admired one assault after the other. "Indeed it was," agreed Redford, stroking his chin. "Few pilots make the conscious choice to fight instead of trying to flee or hide. Fewer still pass the simulation that way. And yet," his gaze fixed itself on the timer and narrowed his eyes slightly, "Lieutenant Wyatt nearly broke the record on his first try." "Surely you jest, Commander Redford," Cynthia countered. "Have you seen the ease of his maneuvering? Almost as soon as the simulation started, he engaged his engines, announcing his presence to the enemy. He must have practiced this or similar trials extensively before, most likely in the academy." "You have yet to read my report," Redford countered while watching Wyatt obeying the orders given by the squadron leader with exemplary accuracy and without doubt. Wyatt has stated that he did not receive more than a dozen trial runs in the training chambers, and then only for the basics when he was allowed. He garnered his experience through practical means and, most likely, patrol deployments. "Preposterous," Cynthia replied, her stoic facade faltering as shock crossed her features. "That is remarkable," Clara exclaimed, unable to hide her excitement. "It seems I was correct. I have won this bet, brother dearest," she said, turning to face her silent brother. "Do not count victory just yet, Clara. 4 simulations remain. Redford, I trust you made the competition substantially difficult, yes?" The prince countered, impassive. "I have done my best, my liege, but already I can conclude that Wyatt Staples is a man of immense talent. Once the implants fully integrate with him and with more experience, we could very well have in our hands an ace or more than that," Redford replied. "Do you think he'd be capable of command at some point?" Cynthia asked, watching as the freighter exploded and the simulation ended. Above, Wyatt's score went up again, putting him among the top 5. "He does not have the training, the capabilities and calling for it. Who is to tell? I shall do my best to groom him into an exceptional commander if he is to gain another rank given the chance," Redford answered, but frowned. "I carefully devised the sequence of the simulations to test various aspects of a pilot's personality, drive, and obedience. Some test the pilot's ability for creative and rapid thinking. Others test patience, morality, and loyalty. So far, he has excelled in both fields." "Then we must watch!" Clara exclaimed, wincing when she saw a competitor's fighter get destroyed for disobeying a command for the sake of personal glory. Cynthia would have rolled her eyes at her friend's love for space engagements. But she, too, was fixated on the competition, especially on a particular pilot. "Another pile of scrap!" Wyatt declared with a playful, mocking laughter as he destroyed a 4th drone. After the 2nd simulation ended, the 3rd started. The objective was easy: destroy the automated drones before one of them can escape and report back to the enemy of his position. Pretty standard mission were it not for the fact that there were 20 drones, and they were sophisticated enough to divide their forces into those that stood behind to fight and those that moved at max speed, escaping the battlefield. At first, he went for the escaping drones, but the moment he destroyed one, another ran away in an entirely different direction. Now he was weaving back between kinetic rounds and laser strikes that tickled his shields, but they were bug bites that would eventually deplete them and destroy them if he wasn't careful. The drones weren't as fast as his fighter and didn't have shields, but were agile and small enough to cause even the fighter's targeting systems trouble. Not to mention that they all had short-range jammers, further complicating the situation. He smirked. But drones are drones. And drones are stupid and predictable, he thought, as he spared a glance at his screen, seeing a dozen drones clumped together behind him. He had spent a minute dodging their attacks and violently shifting directions. In truth, he was herding the drones together. "Computer, lock targets! Fire missiles! Release the mine!" he ordered, and the AI obeyed. He felt his fighter shudder as his 4 Hawk missiles and the mine's lock disengaged. 3 seconds later, the proximity mine exploded when he pressed the manual detonator, destroying the drones pursuing him in a single explosion. Then he watched with satisfaction as one by one the 4 remaining drones were destroyed when the missiles reached them. With that, the trial of extermination ended. Everything around him darkened again, and he took the moment to calm himself, readying himself for the next trial. When the view returned, he was now staring at a heavily damaged Principality frigate, and his communicator instantly detected a rescue beacon signal. "Welcome to the 4th trial. This is the trial of morality. A Principality frigate has been heavily damaged after an engagement with pirates. Render aid to them." Wyatt frowned. "Computer, perform a full sweep of the vessel and the surroundings." "Performing," the AI replied and remained silent for several seconds. "Complete. The vessel is heavily damaged and is venting atmosphere. Engines are offline. The reactor is still active and providing life support. 177 life signals were detected on board. No other gravitic, radiation, or heat signatures have been detected within sensor range." "Render aid to them," Wyatt replied, crossing his arms and thinking through his possibilities. He couldn't take anyone with him. His fighter was a one-manned vessel. At the rate the frigate was venting atmosphere, he knew he wouldn't even make it half the system away before space claimed the survivors, and there were no other ships or signatures nearby. "Wait, they were attacked by pirates. Where are the pirates?" "Computer, full power to sensors. Search for any large stationary and moving bodies." "Performing. 2 bodies detected at sensor range limit and moving away. Signatures unknown," the AI informed. "So it's not an ambush." Closing his eyes, he uttered the next words quietly. "Computer, target the ship's reactor and fire missiles." "Cannot comply. Friendly fire is prohibited," the AI retorted. "Of course," Wyatt chittered. He moved his fighter around until he got a clear shot at the ship's reactor. Without hesitation, he squeezed the trigger, sending hundreds of kinetic rounds directly at the crippled frigate. 10 seconds of sustained fire were enough to puncture the already damaged reactor, and with an explosion that briefly created a small star, it was gone. "This is just a simulation, damn it," he said, and all darkened again. The scene changed again, showing a pitched battle between Drazan and Principality fleets in the distance, but close enough that he could see it on the display screens. "This is the 5th trial, the trial of bravery. Your squadron has been disrupted and you're on your own. Fight on for the Principality." "For the Principality," Wyatt replied, eyes narrowing before moving in to join the battle. "I'm surprised he took the time to assess the situation like that. Most others just destroyed the ship without a second thought," Cynthia pointed out. "It seems that I have many bloodthirsty pilots under my command," Redford commented. "Given the circumstances, they shall be useful. But I concur with your assessment, Lady Cynthia. I was not expecting him to ensure that it wasn't a trap. I must confess I thought he would try to save anyone at all. A sad reality we must face in times of peril. Not everyone can be saved. Sometimes taking the humane option is all the aid anyone can expect to receive and deliver," the prince said, nodding once in approval. That being said, his skill in combat against those drones was exceptional. Even veterans have difficulty clearing that simulation successfully. Clara didn't say anything as she was too fixated on the ongoing battles across the screens. They all started roughly at the same time, though Wyatt maintained a 10-second advantage over the rest, thanks to his quick victory in the first simulation. But his advantage dwindled as he took a more cautious, measured approach with the following ones. Out of the 20 participants, 5 had already been destroyed after 2 minutes of feverish battle. They performed well as they were veterans and great pilots, but that just wasn't enough to grant them victory. Another participant fell seconds later, followed by another, and yet one more in quick succession. Only when only 3 remained did she feel a hand touch her shoulder. She didn't bother to look at Cynthia as she pulled her back. Who cared about being unsightly when she was seeing something that she loved? She couldn't be a pilot thanks to her status, but she had always loved watching fighter squadrons fly through space and the atmosphere. She had a huge collection of recordings depicting dogfights, and she never missed any of the racing and fighting tournaments. Her love for it was open and on full display, and as she watched Wyatt and the 2 remaining participants do their best in their simulations, she couldn't help but smile when the scripted destruction of the Drazan flagship signaled the end of the simulation. She relaxed in her seat, sighing contently as she watched Wyatt's name go from 4th place to 3rd. "Commander Redford, why is Wyatt in 3rd place? His performance so far, in my not insignificant opinion, has been most excellent and above the rest of the participants. He should be at the lead." "Clara," Cynthia sighed. "Your Majesty, Wyatt is a commoner," Redford answered, saying nothing more. Dejected, the princess frowned slightly. "Ah, yes, of course. How forgetful of me. I was so enthralled by the performance that I—" "Redford, no, no." Whatever she was going to say died in her throat when she noticed that every screen was black and all at once came to life to show the same scenario. "You didn't, Redford." The prince gave out a dignified chuckle. "Clara, calm yourself. It wouldn't be a competition without a true test now, would it?" Through her time of service and more years being Clara's closest friend, Cynthia came to know several things about her friend's tastes, hobbies, duties, and more. While she didn't share the burning love Clara had for fighter races, shows, tournaments, and dogfights, she knew enough to recognize the 6th and final simulation Redford had prepared for the 20 pilots. "ZTK 990, one of the unwinnable scenarios," she muttered. Redford nodded, his face stoic and serious. "Better known as honor in death. This is the 6th and final trial, the trial of glory. Die with honor," the AI said. For his part, Wyatt couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a lone Principality cruiser. There were no stations, no asteroids, no planets, moons, or anything else he could use as cover. Just pure, open, cold space between the cruiser and his lone fighter. "Die with honor?" he muttered. Then he gritted his teeth. "Die with honor?" he shouted, hitting his armrests at the same time. "A cruiser set against a single fighter? How am I to die with honor? Honor, honor, it says. What the fuck is even honor worth if I'm dead?" He spat angrily. Die with honor. What a joke. Only a petulant blue blood could come up with something so stupid. Die with honor, my ass. "If I have to die, then I'll welcome it," But not like this. Not when I can still do something. Die with honor? Screw that, he chanted, his veins pumping hot iron instead of blood at that precise moment. Then he analyzed his situation. My missiles won't do anything to the cruiser. At best, the mine could weaken its shields first somewhat. My guns are useless. My only advantage is my size and speed, but that cruiser has enough missiles to swarm me. If I get too close, then the PD turrets will shred me to pieces. What can I even do? As he pondered his situation, he noticed that the cruiser wasn't doing anything. It was waiting for him to make the first move. An eternity passed, or maybe it was just a minute, perhaps more, perhaps less. Time lost meaning as Wyatt's tried to come up with any solution whatsoever. Eventually, he smirked. Die with honor? I rather live in shame, he said, and his fighter began to move. There goes another one, Cynthia exclaimed, as the 15th participant's ship exploded. At least this one opened communications first. 9 surrendered their ship and were destroyed for cowardice. 3 more tried to negotiate and were destroyed for insubordination. 2 attempted to fight back and were destroyed for treason, Redford listed. Make that 10 surrender attempts now, he said as the 16th ship exploded. Clara said nothing as she stared at the screens, and the large, bold word now appearing on 16 of them. Defeat. She knew this scenario well, but how to beat it was a closely guarded secret that, even for her, took several bribes and favors to get the answer to that puzzling simulation. In short, you had to commit suicide, but not just any sort of suicide. To pass, you had to contact the cruiser and proclaim your loyalty toward the principality and, more pointedly, to the noble houses that ruled it. You then had to admit to the crimes you were accused of, and then, only after being judged worthy enough to do so, you were permitted to die with honor. You were allowed to commit suicide via self-destruction or by spacing yourself. Supposedly, only those truly honorable and loyal to the principality could figure out what needed to be done. It was as unfair and one-sided as it could get. Another fighter exploded, choosing correctly to commit suicide, but without the proper steps first. Thus, another defeat was in full display. The rest of the watchers were murmuring amongst each other, doing their best to not disturb royalty and, more so, the prince himself. But she could make out faint bets being claimed, jests, and other unsavory comments here and there. When the 18th ship exploded and was shortly followed by the 19th, her sole focus remained on Wyatt's screen. He had not moved in over 3 minutes now, she noticed. What is he waiting for? Cynthia questioned. Surely even he must realize there is no winning this. No matter how talented of a pilot he is, victory is impossible in those circumstances. Redford was about to comment something when all of a sudden Wyatt's ship surged forth, quickly reaching maximum speed. What is he doing? He asked, astonished. Something unorthodox, I presume, the prince said, lips curling into a barely perceptible smirk. Clara watched intently as Wyatt's fighter launched all 4 Hawk missiles, but they didn't surge forth right away. Instead, they formed up below his fighter only for the mine to be released along with its clamp. The magnetic clamp latched itself to one of the missiles, and then they ventured forth quickly. The cruiser then launched its counter-assault in the form of a dozen missiles and a series of kinetic projectiles. Its 2 railguns were just warming up and wouldn't be able to intercept the fighter for a few seconds yet. The fighter weaved and moved gracefully yet violently to avoid the incoming fire, deploying all of its flares to further confuse the cruiser's targeting system. Then, the fighter activated its emergency afterburner and suddenly tripled in speed. "Is he insane?" Redford declared, not believing what he was seeing. In truth, no one watching could believe what they were seeing. The fighter was now going too fast, and thanks to the scrambled and confused targeting system of the cruiser, it failed to take it down as it left a plume of white, hot light behind it. Seconds seemed to stretch for hours until the small fighter, traveling at impossible speeds, enough to liquefy the bones of its pilot, slammed against the shields of the cruiser with the strength equivalent of a nuclear warhead. It was more than enough to knock the shields down, but caused no more than a few cosmetic scratches on the outer hull. Wyatt's suicidal ditch effort had, it seemed, failed. That is, of course, until the missiles arrived 5 seconds after the initial impact. The cruiser and everyone watching had been so focused on the insanity of the fighter ramming attempt that they had completely ignored the missiles. Even the cruiser's missiles had flown into dark space, their original objective lost. The missiles impacted at the same time in the exact spot the fighter had been aiming for, the bridge deck. Alone, the missiles wouldn't have caused enough damage to do more than serious exterior damage. But the mine was another monster altogether. The mine exploded along with the missiles, and their combined explosive force was more than enough to destroy the entire bridge deck, crippling the ship at least for some time, and forcing it to either retreat to safety from the auxiliary command consoles or wait to be rescued. As if that wasn't enough, the display shifted quickly away from the cruiser and focused on a small, oval-shaped cockpit that had been ejected from the fighter at some point during the encounter. Most likely when the flares were deployed and the rest had been programmed automatically. Then the screen went black and a new word appeared on it, something that caused everyone, even the prince himself, to stand up in shock. Victory! Clara couldn't hide her wide, pearly white smile. That was the best performance I've ever seen, she thought gleefully. When Wyatt's chamber opened, he was instantly greeted by flabbergasted Redford. "Commander? How?" he asked without thinking. "How did that you even thought of doing something like that? And the program? Counted that as a victory? How?" His voice was calm and collected, but it couldn't hide just how amazed he was. "I must admit, Lieutenant Wyatt Staples, that I'm most impressed too. Never have I seen such a creative take on that particular scenario," the prince said, approaching regally. "Tell us, what drove you to reach such a conclusion?" "Yeah, I'm not about to tell him that I pretty much thought the goal was stupid now, am I?" Wyatt cleared his throat. "The goal was to die with honor, so I thought, what if there's another way?" He paused as he saw Cynthia and Clara approach, and behind them several spectators also got closer, but keeping a respectful distance from the royals to avoid crowding them. "And well, that happened, my liege." "But how? A single fighter crippling a cruiser, that is beyond ridiculous," Cynthia exclaimed. "What the hell is going on? They're acting as if I did something extraordinary. Ugh! I'm probably going to get court-martialed for not following that asinine objective. Seriously, die with honor? Who came up with that absurdity?" Wyatt raised both hands in defense. "I'm not sure that can work in an actual fight. It was just a simulation, after all. I knew I lacked the fighter power to do anything significant. But then I realized that while I didn't have the power, I had the mass. So I used it to let my guns be effective. And I doubt I'd survive on an ejected cockpit for long, but it doubles as a lifeboat in an emergency." He then saluted and turned to Redford. "Commander, I hope that my abilities were suitable enough to be of your approval?" "Suitable enough?" Redford shook his head. "Wyatt, look up behind you." Wyatt blinked twice, turned, and stared up to see his display screen showing the word victory. Then after a second or two, every screen displayed the score and the rank of the competitors. He saw his name sitting at the top. First place, Lieutenant Wyatt Staples. Final score, 95,690 points. 50,000 points more than the second place, Wyatt thought. Then he fainted.